Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Monday, June 12th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Alissa Quart, Executive Director of the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, author of her latest Bootstrapped, Liberating Ourselves from the American Dream. Then Aaron Kleinman, Director of Research for the States Project at Future Now. Important if you are in Virginia to listen to this segment. Also on the program today, Trump due for arraignment tomorrow in a Florida federal court, but very possible the case will be delayed because he's having trouble finding a lawyer in the state of Florida.
Do they have lawyers in Florida?
Very few. DOJ is investigating a conservative-backed effort to infiltrate the DNC in 2020 run-up. Meanwhile, an overpass on I-95 outside of Philly collapses. Supposedly take months to repair. Fortunately, no one injured. New York City food delivery workers now to get an nearly $18 per hour minimum wage. Setting the table for the rest of the country.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Silvio Berlusconi dies, as does the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski. Coincidence?
Did you ever see him in the same place?
Fox sends Tucker a cease and desist Twitter show letter. J.P. Morgan reaches a settlement with Jeffrey Epstein victims. Just a couple of weeks after Jamie Dimon had provided a deposition and also avoiding him actually have to testifying under oath. Meanwhile, Trader Joe's accused of illegal firing by the Trader Joe's union. And Alina Health, major nonprofit health organization in the Midwest, pauses its policy of cutting off patients who are in debt. Congratulations, and sorry to let you know that the rest of them are still doing that. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. It's the beginning of a new week. Emma Vigeland.
Fun day, Monday.
Okay, fair enough. I'll accept that. Fun day, Monday.
All right. Have you cut me my check yet? So just check
For
it
what,
over there.
Fun day, Monday?
Yeah, I mean that's
New IP just dropped.
Are you? Yeah, I'm copywriting all this crap.
Yeah, it's like Marvel. Like,
All right.
we got to keep going.
Yep.
We
no
can't
idea.
stay with the old ones for too long.
All right. Let's. I know it's supposed to be fun day, but let's get right into this. The as people have started to pour over the charges and the indictments against Donald Trump, more and more over the course of the weekend, you could just see it sort of turn to like sort of 3/4 of the political universe was like, whoa, this is he may go to jail for this. And then there was like, I guess 1/3 of the political universe, or 1/4. I can't remember what I said at the beginning. This is not I didn't really do a
Scientific,
quantitative study. And then the other ones were, of course, talking about Hillary Clinton. And trying to bring up her server stuff and all of this.
Well, to be fair, she brought it up. I mean, she uses an opportunity to sell but her emails merch, which was a weird flex. Like,
hey, it's her right to do that. We have to allow it.
What she did was nothing in comparison to Trump actively trying to conceal and not give back documents, but it was a weird time for her to flex and be like, I mishandled things too.
I mean, really stupid. But nevertheless, I have a feeling the rest of this would have followed regardless of her
bringing it up.
Looking for any opportunity to sell merch, even if it goes to charity. They have enough money. Just give the money to charity and save, wherever they purchase the merch is from. With all that said, we have a clip of Bill Barr, but I'm not going to play that one. We have a clip of Bill Barr saying this is very damning, but we're like, well, who is even more of a shill for Trump to say it? And we didn't. Apparently, Alan Dershowitz was unavailable. But here is Jonathan Turley, who never heard of a Trump accusation that he thought was completely without merit until Trump facing these 31 counts of willful retention of national defense information. And here's clip number one of Turley on Fox News in the morning, or I should say in the afternoon, and then he comes back later in the day, I think it is, to reiterate.
The president goes on to say, well, what happens if we just don't respond at all to the subpoena, I guess, or don't play ball with them? The president goes on to say, wouldn't it be better if we just told them we don't have anything here? Well, look, isn't it better if there are no documents?
Pause. We should say that is the transcript, apparently, of recordings they have of Trump, more or less saying, I'm guilty, but is there a way for us to hide the fact that I'm guilty?
Yeah,
I mean,
as somebody who went and listened to a lot of the Nixon tapes, Nixon knew he was being recorded and was a lot more obscure in the way he would formulate these things. He wouldn't be like, hey, look at this. This is top secret. You can't look at this.
Amazing. But go ahead.
We just told them we don't have anything here. Well, look, isn't it better if there are no documents? They've got these conversations that were memorialized by the president's attorneys. There's also this recording of him where he talks about this plan that's believed an attack plan against Iran. I mean, they've got a lot of information in this, Jonathan.
No, it is an extremely damning indictment. There are indictments that are sometimes called narrative or speaking indictments. These are indictments that are really meant to make a point as to the depth of the evidence. There are some indictments that are just bare bones. This is not. The special counsel knew that there would be a lot of people who were going to allege that the Department of Justice was acting in a biased or politically motivated way. This is clearly an indictment that was drafted to answer those questions. It's overwhelming in details. And, the Trump team should not fool itself. These are hits below the waterline. These are witnesses who apparently testified under oath, gave statements to federal investigators, both of which can be criminally charged if they're false. Those witnesses are directly quoting the president in encouraging others not to look for documents or allegedly to conceal them. It's damaging. And the key here to keep in mind is that every case I've ever been involved with, the indictment was a heart stopper. These are written by lawyers who are trying to convict a client. Every indictment I've ever dealt with has fallen apart to some degree once we look more carefully at what the evidence may be. But this is not an indictment that you can dismiss.
Watch me.
I mean, you got Turley here saying clearly what happened with this indictment too is that it is not just the charge. They have basically laid out the case. Mm-hmm. Like they've provided all of this evidence up front. And I think they felt like they must have had to do to justify the indictment. Here is, and then Turley comes back. I guess this is like what, I don't know, shortly
A few hours
afterwards.
later, yeah.
And they have pictures of the documents. Like, this wasn't a situation where it's like, I didn't realize it was behind the coats. No.
I love saying, wouldn't it be better if there was no documents? As you look at pictures of just a whole bunch of cardboard boxes of documents. How do you accidentally end up with that?
Oh,
much
no.
shit?
I think we were in bathrooms.
This stuck to the bottom of my shoe.
Oh, I didn't know that was in my backpack.
Put up the image. Yeah, this stuck to the bottom. Did we have that? I'm sorry. I thought that was on pallets. I don't know why we put it on pallets. Okay, go ahead.
Jonathan, this is the first time our viewers are starting to get a look at some of these pictures. The boxes piled up in various locations there at Mar-a-Lago. Going back to that picture that was on the screen just a moment ago, clearly there were boxes photographed in this indictment that were in a bathroom with a toilet and a sink next to it. To John's earlier point about this could have been a space that was accessed by any visitors to the estate.
Yeah, it's really breathtaking.
Pause it for 1 second. I just want everybody to know, I like to read in the bathroom. Yeah. That's what's going on here.
That's where I do my research.
I was just boning up. I said, bring them all into the bathroom. I'll look through them to see if there's any ones that are top secret.
Point about this could have been a space that was accessed by any visitors to the estate.
Yeah, it's really breathtaking. Obviously, this is mishandling. Putting classified documents into ballrooms and bathrooms is borders on the bizarre. And these are the types of pictures that hit you below the waterline in a trial. I mean, jurors tend to be very visual in terms of evidence. Yeah. And it's hard to show a picture of these boxes surrounding a toilet and saying, we really acted responsibly. Now, we haven't really heard from the Trump team on these specific allegations. But also keep in mind, there's a bit of count stacking here. That is, the government's bringing dozens of counts. They only have to land one of those punches. I mean, keep in mind that every one of these counts is coming with a substantial potential sentence. So for the Trump team, they have to run the table. They have to take out every single count. Or you've got a 76-year-old man looking at a potentially terminal sentence. So
we can end on that.
Big challenge.
Turley, whoa.
Yeah, well, I'll get the best lawyer. He'll be able to handle all of these, no problem.
I'm going to live forever.
Jonathan, you'll die before me, okay?
I work in the hospitality industry. When you put a little basket with magazines for your guests in the bathroom, I'm just trying to make people all cozy and nice in Mar-a-Lago.
The bottom line, though, is really that there is going to be assuming that Trump does not have a heart attack over all these things, and there's every reason to believe there's going to be a whole nother set of charges completely unrelated to this within 2.5 months out of Georgia, and that's what we were led to believe by the DA there, I guess. But this is going to turn out to be a race between Trump's ability to delay and November 7th, 2024 election? Is it the 7th? This is just going to be a race. And my guess is Trump is going to be able to slow the process or maybe, go and appeal a conviction. Because, look, I have no way of assessing this stuff. But if Jonathan Turley is out there on Fox News now saying, I've seen a lot of indictments that really fall apart upon scrutiny, But
yeah, when you've lost
this
him,
one seems like there's a mountain of evidence that we probably haven't even seen all the evidence.
If he's mentioning cannonballs hitting ships beneath the water
Yes.
line multiple times.
Yeah.
But it's the same reason that Trusty and the other lawyers are resigning. Like, Turley understands I have a reputation to uphold at least slightly. I can't be kicked out of all of the hallowed legal halls in this country.
Oh no,
And-
I don't even think that. I think it's just that, like, it's just too overwhelming.
Well,
like
but-
there's just no
yeah,
room
exactly.
to argue, and it's going to end up in front of a court. Like, this isn't just a hypothetical, this is unconstitutional or that's unconstitutional or this or that. This is a done deal. This is going to end up in court and it's going to be resolved there. And it does not seem like Trump is paying any political price for this.
Oh my gosh.
As much as DeSantis is sitting there hoping that this is this is going to be the way that he's going to get the nomination if somehow Trump is in jail. But the other thing people should keep an eye out for, which I think is absolutely reprehensible, is the idea that the DOJ would make some type of deal where we stop pressing charges if you don't run.
Rachel Maddow made that case, by the way, on television. I mean, that's absurd.
I'm not terribly surprised.
Yeah,
but it would come from a lot of different quarters. I'm sure I think Geraldo did the other day too. It's absurd. It's absurd for multiple reasons. One, if you don't want a political criminal prosecution, then don't make your not involvement in politics a way for us to drop the charges, right? Like it couldn't be more explicit. We're going to threaten you with these charges unless you decide not to run, and then we're going to pull the charges.
That's a definition of corruption. That's not how any society should be
it should not
responding
work
to
that way.
this.
Plus, the guy should be held accountable. And if the American people end up electing him president, despite the fact that this is going on, it's a bad thing, but interesting to know. But you're not going to be able to get past this if the DOJ just decides if you don't run, then then we will drop charges. That's just absurd. That's just absurd. That is anything but trying to keep your criminal justice system and your politics separate.
I mean,
Please bribe me.
That's Nixon. It's like a derivation of the Nixon essentially resigning to escape any kind of justice on that front as well. I mean, that kind of thinking just lets powerful people get away with what they want to do.
No, but that's different because impeachment is, by its very nature, a political process.
That's true.
And he was not facing. Now, he could have faced criminal charges,
right?
But he was pardoned. But impeachment, he resigned to avoid impeachment. And impeachment is a political process. Definitionally, it is not a criminal trial. And so that is a very, very important distinction for people to have. He was pardoned by Ford later, which may have made him escape any type of criminal proceedings, which is problematic in my estimation. But quitting the presidency because you want to avoid impeachment, that is all within the context of the political system. All right, we're going to take a break in just a moment. We're going to be talking to Alissa Quart. But before we do, a couple of words from our sponsor. I want to thank HelloFresh, which apparently is America's #1 meal kit. I'm not surprised by that at all, for supporting the Majority Report, and also for making it a little bit easier for me to make good home-cooked meals for my kids. And you can go right now to go to HelloFresh.com/majority16. HelloFresh.com/majority16. Use the code majority16. And you get 16 free meals plus free shipping. And I can imagine why they do this. It is because once you've tried a bunch of their meals, you're going to be psyched and you're going to be hooked. The beauty for me with HelloFresh, and I've used services like this before, but HelloFresh has varying time prep things.
Mm-hmm.
And I have dreams. I look at sometimes the 35-minute ones or the 40-minute ones, or even, the 30-minute ones. And I'm like, yes, someday. Maybe that's like a Saturday. But if you need dinner quickly, they have, for my taste, they have these quick and easy recipes on their menu. They have like, I don't know what it is, like 40 recipes every week in which you can choose from. But they have a bunch that will take about 20 minutes and some that take even like 15 minutes or less. And it's super easy to cook. Not a ton of prep time, fresh ingredients, simple stuff. I did like it was a balsamic, maybe it was like a honey or rosemary balsamic chicken, had green beans and garlic bread, which is like basically, it's garlic bread for my kids is like paying them money.
Oh,
They'll eat this. But they ate all of it. And it took me about 15, 20 minutes to prepare. It's super easy. Plus, I'm saving time because I don't have to go get grocery shopping for this stuff. And not only that, HelloFresh ends up being cheaper than buying groceries. And it's significantly cheaper than ordering in or, I guess, takeout. But in New York, you order in all the time. And this has allowed me to make a couple of like home-cooked meals a week for my kids. Go to HelloFresh.com/majority16. Use the code majority16. 16 free meals plus free shipping. I also did a pork sausage like pasta.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, that took like 15 minutes, and I had some of the zucchini for me, some, and the kids wouldn't eat the zucchini, but that's fine. All right, quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Alissa Quart. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Alissa Quart. She is the Executive Director of the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, author of Bootstrapped, Liberating Ourselves from the American Dream. Alissa, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. It's fun to be here.
Let's just start with the myth. Now, I had heard about the saying bootstrapped. I don't know how I heard this from like 3 or 4 years ago, but people don't really realize the origins of the idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. Tell us about that. And then let's just talk about the larger sort of myth that's been constructed.
Yeah, it's a good week because of the indictment, actually, to talk about the larger myth, because we know that, bizarrely enough, Donald Trump has benefited from the self-made man myth. But pulling yourself up by your bootstraps started out as a joke. It started out in the 19th century. It was used to describe like the weird inventors and the outliers in a town who would like have fantasies about themselves that they could, and then they'd be mocked in the local newspaper. So Nimrod Murphy believed he could pull himself up by the bootstraps. That was one article. I mean, if you think about it, it's impossible. If you pull, you'd have to be Simone Biles to be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You flip over, it doesn't work. So, but for some reason, and this is true for like a lot of these kind of idioms, they start out as jokes and then they become definitional about how people see themselves as Americans, how they see their promise, their success, their monetary existence. And I mean, it pertains to like a number of other phrases, including the self-made man and the Horatio Alger story also, which I could get into. But so it's kind of interesting.
Well, let's talk about these, like the development of these myths. I mean, because you cite both Emerson and Thoreau, and also, like you say, Horatio Alger. I should say all guys who lived within like maybe 20 miles of each other in Massachusetts. I don't know what that's about, but let's just start with like the idea of the individualism that we get from Concord and the Walden Pond.
Right. So that starts with Emerson, Thoreau, transcendentalists, poetic, imaginative people, but they had this concept of self-reliance where, especially Emerson, where, the individual was supposed to depend on themselves, look for the truth within themselves. In Thoreau's case, literally live alone, right, on Walden Pond. We all read that in high school, and not depend on a community, not depend on society norms. In some ways, it was a beautiful thing because it was about being unconventional, not being a religious conformist, all this kind of thing. But on the other side of it, it was this like kind of slightly hectoring thing that we were all supposed to be surviving, on our own steam. And, one of the things I found really kind of funny and curious was Thoreau, his mother did do his cooking and washing, which is something that you heard sometimes. Some people have heard, some people didn't. During while he was at Walden, he also hung out with a lot of people. He was very wildly social, and Emerson had this incredible, unfailing support of his wife, who would clean his house top to bottom, including the day before she gave birth. And so I sort of go through these things not as a gotcha entirely, but just to show how even people who have this idea of pure self-sufficiency are dependent on others, from their wives to, inherited money to their friends and their, kind of companions. Yeah.
Well, where did that? What was the foundations of that? I mean, it must have existed in this. Was it the pioneer spirit? Was it, these guys are back in Massachusetts and they're, hearing stories of people living on the frontier, and they try and create a sort of like an intellectual version of this, or I mean, they could have left Concord and they could have gone west, and they could have found a space where there literally was nobody.
I see it in terms of entrepreneurialism in that period a little. Like the phrase "self-made man" is coined in the 1830s, also, as was "pull yourself up by your bootstraps," and it was by a Kentucky politician, Clay, who was like, we're a self-made man, talking about, people who created steamboats and things like this. Of course, if you think about Kentucky, most of the wealth there was anything but self-made. It was dependent on the labor of enslaved peoples. So I think there is an atmosphere in that time of, great kind of industrialism and invention, and the forming of companies and kind of the foundations of America, but also a lot of the lies of America were being created then, right? We have the labor of people who are not being paid, or indentured servants. And we have, obviously women without a right to vote. And we have, indigenous people having their land taken away to pay for to be distributed to settlers. So I think that is part of it too, that was the moment of both incredible dependence on people whose dependence we weren't acknowledging, and, a great kind of entrepreneurialism.
Where does the moralistic element come from, right? That I feel like gets so assigned to the bootstraps obsessive people today. I mean, like, how does that get translated to politics, where you're moralizing about people's inability to help themselves from these texts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been there, and it sort of migrates into political speeches. Like, we have Hoover talking about rugged individualism. We obviously, up to Reagan, we have Clinton, the end of welfare as we know it, right? We have like a kind of succession of political speeches that I feel like echo that trope that starts with great, poetic thinkers like Emerson and Thoreau, but then sort of becomes more shoddy over time. You have, I read about this, Ayn Rand, and you have, Laura Ingalls Wilder kind of also peddling some of these stories. And Horatio Alger, one of the most successful novelists, I think, ever in America, who peddles these stories as well, although they're a little different than we think. And that sort of makes its way into political speeches and into ways that Americans see themselves. They feel like they have to also pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They vote along these lines to this day. And I mean, I think that's where we get back to some things like Trump, and even people who look to, if you think rationally, look like they've obviously been born with a silver spoon in their mouths, are narrating themselves as if they're self-made. And that is actually kind of conning a lot of people and is part of the kind of the toxic root, which a lot of, Trump's other illegal behavior starts. It starts with this lie that he made this himself.
Let's talk a little bit more about Horatio Alger in the Laura Ingalls Wilder. We spoke a while back to Naomi Oreskes, who had mentioned about the Little House on the Prairie. Actually, the sort of like libertarian sort of foundations of that. And I should add, one of the political stories is always Paul Ryan's brown bag lunch story, where he contends that poor kids would rather not get a free lunch, or kids would rather not get a free lunch at school. They want a brown bag so that, ostensibly, moralizing about the idea of how much we're hurting people by providing free lunches at school. But talk about the Little House on the Prairie, and also the Horatio Alger turns out to be a little bit creepy as well. But tell us about those two examples that are sort of foundational of this myth.
So Horatio Alger, he had been a minister in Brewster, Massachusetts. Again, it's quite close to the Transcendentalists, and he had man of the cloth, had been accused and kind of convincingly found to have sexually molested two boys in his parish, and then sort of chased out of the ministry. And then his second act was being a writer. And so he started to write these novels, and they're all, it's kind of creepy. They're all about young boys, teenagers who make it. And they start out as like a Bowery boy, which is like this. And then in New York City was the poorest boys were living on the Bowery. They were orphans. There's tens of thousands of them back in that time. And, people who were working as buskers. The titles of the book, they're like Paul the Peddler, Ragged Dick. That was one of the, and so these were teenage
He
boys.
wrote about like 90 or like 100 books, somewhere around there. Maybe it was a little bit less.
And he sold millions and millions, per year at some point. And so these books, though, they always meet an older man who's wealthy, who saves them. So again, this is one of these misunderstandings. Horatio Alger's story becomes the story of somebody who makes it by themselves, rags to riches, self-made man from teen boy on the street to Titan. But in truth, it was actually this older rich guy rescues them. And I don't know if you can draw what conclusions you want from about Horatio Alger's inner life from that. But to me, that's kind of interesting that then everybody's like, oh, the Horatio Alger story. I mean, Trump described his father as a Horatio Alger story. Michael Moore has said Horatio Alger is the drug of the American drug, that story. But if you look at the actual Horatio Alger and his actual novels, they're kind of like a version of the Marriage Plot where, but it's a man who saves a teen boy.
Talk about, I guess the part about Little House on the Prairie that we don't hear about.
So yeah, they were real libertarians, Laura Ingalls Wilder and her daughter Rose, and they sort of saw this series as propaganda. The series of Little House on the Prairie books, it was like a Little House in the Woods. There's like a number of them, and there was obviously the TV series with Michael Landon from the 1980s, 70s, and 80s. But those were also hugely popular, and they also were preaching this message of surviving on your own. In fact, they were more purely that than Horatio Alger novels. Like no one saves the family or the little kids who are so scrappy and surviving and farming and in places they've never lived before, and making fighting nature and all this other stuff. But it was meant to again to sort of convince people that they need to stand on their own 2 feet and they should be doing all this kind of survivalist activity, and also that the current president, which that that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who came after Hoover, they were big Hoover fans, that he was toxic. They had Rose and Laura Ingalls Wilder had all these thoughts that were incredibly negative about the New Deal and FDR, and they saw this series of novels as, again, like a propaganda against the New Deal, which it just was kind of fascinating.
Tell us, before we get into sort of the, some of the ways that the American dream gets sold to us, let's just stop for a moment also, and maybe you provide some facts in there. The one that I had never really been aware of was like the measure of how much of U.S. wealth is inherited across the board. But in terms of like the idea, the premise of this this myth is that if you work hard and you play by the rules, which I think was like a famous like Clinton formulation, you're going to get ahead. Talk about sort of like the actual numbers a little bit as to where people actually make their money in reality in this country. Or I should make their money, get their money.
Yeah, get their money. So something like it was the Fortune 500 list, and I think it was done like 10 years ago, to be fair. But the nonprofit economic think tank looked at the numbers and discovered that 60% of the people on the list had been born, if not wealthy, then well off. So this idea that everyone's born on that list is majority are born on third base and some are born on second base, to use that overused metaphor. So that's just one of the many incredible stats I found that were like really about the lack of wealth, equal wealth distribution in this country, how much inheritance has to play in this, how much inherited property has to play in this, which is part of why we have such white wealth in this country, because of a history of redlining around home ownership, around people of color. And just it's kind of mind-boggling. And the thing that the tag I give that whole lie that, oh, we deserve this, we deserve this 60% of us who with inherited wealth being in the Fortune 500 list, is rich fictions, and they're stories that I think some of the wealthier people in America like to tell, and some of the less wealthy people in America believe that those who have these resources and have had them for generations somehow are better and they deserve them. And it's kind of the deserving rich. And I think that's one of the symptoms or the products of this, self-made man story. It's just pulled the wool over the eyes of generations.
Let's talk about that, sort of the isolation that is created and the sort of the self-blame and the sort of the self-help sort of industry that is also feeds into this myth. I mean, I remember interviewing, and I cannot remember who it was that wrote the No Man's Land, but it was about people who had lost their homes in the wake of the financial crisis. And maybe we did a couple of authors who had written, having done ethnographies of a lot of these people.
Evicted?
Maybe it was Evicted, and Matthew, is it?
Matthew does it, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
And the, like, almost to a person, everyone they interviewed felt that they had made bad choices that had led to their financial ruin, and did not connect the dots that there was like a million other people who lost their homes in that financial crisis. And maybe there was something systemically wrong, but talk about the sort of like, the institutions, I guess, that feed into that notion of individual failing that exists today.
Yeah. So, institutions, I mean, everything from corporate mindfulness, which is a huge, business, honestly. And I'm thinking of not just classes where you're told to breathe, and major corporations, that they have workshops, most of them are kind of harmless. The only harm really is they put the pressure back on the individual worker. Why are you so stressed? Well, actually, if you're doing breathing exercises at the workplace, that's the cause of your stress, you're probably not, it's not going to really work for you. So that's one of the problems with corporate mindfulness. But also Amazon created this, to that point, created this thing called Amazon. I don't know have you heard of Amazon?
No.
It was like this coffin or porta potty like box that workers were told to go into that was and they, again, was like this meditative thing. I think there were videos or something, and they were like to stand in this box. And, of course, we know that it's really hard to unionize with Amazon, and the hours you can be surveilled, and there's, a lot of low pay. It's not an easy job for people to have, and Amazon is not going to be the answer. So that's like one of the kind of tentacles of this self-blame economy is coming from things like corporate mindfulness. And then, I think, there's lots of other ways that people put the pressure back on the individual. We don't have adequate daycare. And then somehow, especially this came very clear during the pandemic, and I spoke to a number of people who had their older kids minding their younger kids during remote schooling, a 14-year-old or 11-year-old minding a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old while their mother's working 2 different jobs. And especially women who are often in this position as the primary caregiver of their children, it's like, well, what have I done wrong? Why can't I figure out this balance? And it is kind of rigged against the parent, because we spend some of the lowest money in the OECD on daycare. It's a non-daycare system. But I think many of us feel like there's something wrong with us, that we haven't figured that out. That's just one of the many ways that it kind of like, it's toxic, it's septic. You're just living in America and you don't really see it. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I can't afford my kid's sick and I can't afford to take the day off, or whatnot. And that's just one of the many ways that we start this crescendo of self-blame that is because we've been asked to take care of everything about ourselves and our families on our own.
So much of what you said reminded me of something, and then I realized that it sounds like Bright-Sided, which I know that you've done work and worked for a long time with Barbara Ehrenreich. So rest in peace to her. But it's incredible work there too, because it connects the self-help industry, which is essentially it's supposed to be something that unifies people, right, by making them happier, but it's as atomizing as it gets, and it's a part of a culture that eschews collective action, and it's more about it's bootstraps but with like a smiley face on it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the liberals may fall for it more. And that was part of why I wanted to include things like mindfulness or therapy, psychotherapy, which is actually in truth really hard for a lot of people to access, middle-class people as well, but people on Medicaid. I have one writer at EHRP who's been ghosted by her Medicaid therapist and had like severe mental illness during the pandemic. And so that is another way that's put back on the individual, and that is very Barbara, right? But that's something that liberals can fall for more than I did it myself. I'm a survivor. I save money. I'm not going to fall for that welfare stuff. But I think so. That's to me is slightly like that's the more red state version. The more blue state version is this kind of thing, like let's have mindfulness. Let's have therapy. And then if you kind of look under the hood of both of those kind of practices, so both of those healing practices, you can see that there's a lot of pressure put back on the individual, economic, blaming, et cetera, that is not accounted for, and that we or I fall for, right? Like, let's go into therapy, right? And then like you go into therapy and then you realize, oh, I can't actually pay for this, and I don't have the resources to have my kid have her, anxiety treated or whatever. So that to me is one of the ways that pressure is put back on us. I don't know. Yeah.
Let's talk about you in the final part of the book. You talk about sort of what we can do to address this. What are some of the things that we can do? And it also strikes me as some of it's a little bit of a paradox, right? Because some of the responses are individualistic. It's sort of it seems like sort of, the first step is busting the myth. And I've seen so many, Obama sort of did that tried that with Romney. You didn't build that. And we've had books like Susan Mettler's Submerged State, where you start to understand that, like, the wealthiest people get subsidies from the government in the form of tax breaks or that are specifically targeted towards things that only wealthy people, tend to be able to do, buy a house or what can we do though, both, I guess, collectively or individually through a collective, I guess.
Well, I think so. What you're talking about, these externalities that the wealthiest corporations, like not paying adequate taxes, taking their infrastructure for granted, pretending that's part of their, that's what they deserve, and that they don't need to pay taxes to the cities that they're in.
Mortgage tax deduction,
mortgage tax deduction,
as opposed to a rent tax deduction.
Educational write-offs,
right.
Absolutely, and that's something that we need to start looking at critically at. I mean, I'm not the first to say this. The wealth tax would be so much better than the current wealth tax, which is philanthropy, as the main conveyance of, main form of wealth redistribution. But I mean, I'm interested in things like pre-distribution, like social programs that we saw some of during the pandemic that a lot of them have been wheeled back. Like I think, the Biden administration did some remarkable things, American Rescue and child tax credit and all this other stuff, eviction moratorium, relaxing standards on SNAP and Medicaid. To me, these things, we should be celebrating them and bolstering them. And it's obviously very hard in our very politically divided environment, which leads me to the other point, which is we need to be voting for people who've had some experience of economic injustice, and not just people who are like, I'm self-made and they were born on third base. And, Maxwell Alejandro Frost is an example I often use because he was willing to say, I can't afford rent in Washington, D.C. I was born, working class. I'm going to be making $140,000 a year, but right now I'm going to couch surf, and I'm not going to fall for the Bootstraps people, and because he was mocked for saying he was going to stay on friends' couches. I'm not going to let those Republicans who I think is RNC that mocked him. I'm not going to let them do this. I think it's Bootstraps culture. He actually wrote that, and instead he was like, I come from a working class background. I don't have a lot of money. And I think having more people who actually come from those backgrounds representing us is really what we need, because they understand from the ground up what it takes. They understand it's not just this Horatio Alger myth that wasn't even itself to begin with. So that's one thing. And then I recommend a lot of different things in the book, and some of them I love what you said about the paradox, because that's the paradox of our current condition, that the solutions can be like, personal, like I'm going to be an abolitionist, but that's like a personal thing that you have inside you that you're doing politically. And the question is, how can that be made into something collective? But I talk about things like mutual aid, that those were groups that really took off during the pandemic, where people were sharing resources, bringing food to each other, bringing medication to each other. And often and they were volunteers, and the people who led those are now running for office, which is kind of to my other point. Worker co-ops, where the workers get to own their own labor. And so again, they're less likely to be ripped off. Like there's a taxi worker co-op where the taxi drivers own the app. And that's like obviously better than Lyft and Uber, where the people who run them make so much more than the drivers and don't even understand what their experiences are. So, I have a number of others, but I see those. But again, I to your point, yeah, maybe some of them are kind of individualistic in their way, because it's going to affect tens of thousands of people, not, millions. But it's a beginning, and it's also a mindset beginning. It's a way of thinking differently.
What do you make about? I mean, you mentioned the American Rescue Act, and what do you make about the almost like complete absence of the idea that we had cut child poverty by 40% in this country, and then we just decided, it was a fun experiment, but we're done with all that. There just seemed to be both not enough sort of, I guess, recognition that we figured out how to cut child poverty 40% in a year. I mean, we can figure out how to cut it by 80% probably in 2 years. We could probably figure out how to cut it up by about 100%, in another 18 months. And instead of like that being one of the biggest stories of the era, it just goes away with barely a whimper, it seems like.
I feel like it's shocking. It's shocking to me. I mean, I don't want to be glib and say we need better PR, but some of it seems like there's like a sort of lack of branding around achievements, to me.
Well, I mean, it seems like, I mean, I can understand, like, in my most cynical perspective, why the Democratic Party might not want to talk about this, because it was, two Democrats who prevented it from happening again, essentially, in Sinema and Manchin, and that's just the way that it works in the context of our ridiculousness in politics, where, 2 out of whatever it is, 260 Democrats, 2 were able to stop that from happening, the extension of that. But where's the media and the organizations that ostensibly fight for these type of things? Like, how is this not more of a story?
I don't know how to do this. I mean, I do think it's like a branding issue, and it's also an issue of partially maybe of age a little, where some of the people who are closest to this issue are not on, mass media. They're not on TikTok, contemporary media. They're not speaking directly to people who need to know about this. I've been sort of really fascinated looking at like Snap TikTok or food stamps TikTok, because there is this whole culture there. And I'm like, I feel like, I don't know, maybe this is happening, but like the fact that Snap restrictions were relaxed and people were getting a bump and now that's gone. I feel like Democrats should be communicating some of that, communicating what had been and what is happening now better in places like TikTok. And there should be more and better branding. I mean, this is the best thing that came from Occupy to me, is the 99% versus the 1%. I mean, we need really clear paradigms and language like that. Democrats do. So I think some of it is, yeah.
Yeah. I would also say I think that there are a lot more Democrats than we'd like to admit that are just ideologically against giving people that amount of a leg up, because the underlying thing is that there should be a level of desperation in the population that forces people into jobs. And there are a lot more Democrats, I think, ideologically committed to that than we'd like to admit.
I'm sure you're right.
Yeah.
But I do think that still there is a sort of lack of celebration. And some of it is a celebration of what was good. And to me I guess then some of the media, look, we have media that's been contracting and reduced. And again, you have media workers who aren't necessarily close to the people who are on food stamps, right? The media workers in some ways are a parallel universe to the politicians that are, 50% of people on the biggest newspapers' mastheads went to IB and IB plus universities. Not that always means that they wouldn't understand food stamps, but it might mean that there might be more detachment from some of these issues than would be good. So that's part of what we're doing at EHRP, is we're trying to raise a group of people who raise them up, a group of people who our reporters are professionals, but they've experienced homelessness. They've experienced low wage work during the pandemic, would put them in danger physically. They experienced being on SNAP, because I think that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
Alissa Quart, Executive Director of the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. We'll put a link to that and to your book, Bootstrapped, Liberating Ourselves from the American Dream, both in our YouTube and podcast descriptions and at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, folks, going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Aaron Kleinman, Director of Research for the state's Project of Future Now, about a primary that I mistakenly said was tomorrow, but it's actually in a week from tomorrow. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Cedar, have a big one.
Aaron needs a booster
Aaron,
seat.
you look like
hold on.
I don't know if you saw that Richard Dreyfuss interview with Bill Maher, where he
Here we go.
just sort of like
Here we go.
falls out of the chair, essentially. But that's what you had. That was the look you had going on there.
Even higher now.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, there we
sit
go.
up. There you go. All right. Aaron Kleinman, Director of Research for the States Project at Future Now. Aaron, in a week, there's a primary happening. Are there any other primaries happening besides Virginia?
Virginia will be the only primary where it's for state elections the coming fall. So it's the most important one. It's the big headliner. And the entire legislature is up in November. And so we'll be picking the candidates that will be on the ballot in November. And, Democrats hold a 2-seat majority in the Senate. Republicans hold a 2-seat majority in the House. So it's going to be huge. Right-wing Governor Glenn Youngkin is basically floating the idea of a presidential run to raise a ton of kind of right-wing dark money that he's going to pour into these races. So we're going to have to fight against that between the primary and the general election in November.
What's the relevance of Virginia? Does Virginia have any greater relevance to the country than, I don't know, other states?
Well, a couple of things. One is I think we saw in 2020, every state's legislature matters when it comes to basically when the right wing tries to steal a presidential election. And so thankfully in 2022, we were able to stop a lot of those efforts in their tracks by basically eliminating some right-wing margins in some key states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, and closing the gap in Arizona and New Hampshire. So again, that'll be really helpful heading into the presidential election. We don't know what they'll try in Virginia in 2024, so that's always a good backstop. But really, one of the biggest things with national importance is protecting abortion rights. Virginia is now the only state in the South that where abortion rights are protected, or fully protected, where there hasn't been an attempt to roll them back since the Dobbs decision. And what is standing between kind of the far right forced birth movement and control is basically the Virginia State Senate right now. And if you also think about Virginia geographically, the southwest corner of Virginia is like pretty close to Nashville, if you think about it. So it really is a lifeline for millions of people throughout the South. And so protecting the legislature is going to be huge in that regard. And so we're also thinking about kind of, well, how can we make sure that there's a pro-choice majority through primaries? And we actually found a race in the House where there's a potential pro-life candidate running as a Democrat that we're trying to stop.
All right, I want to get to that, but I also wanted to just add too, one thing that has always struck me about Virginia is in the same way that sort of New York and maybe LA is overrepresented in the media, what happens in Virginia seems to me to be overrepresented within our political narratives. And were it not for, I think, like Youngkin winning, I think that they would have been a much harder time in developing this narrative that Democrats were going to get destroyed in 2022. And in the absence of that narrative, I think they would have put more money into places like the Wisconsin Senate race and in other places. And there could have been more there, it could have been, a wider margin in the Senate, maybe even like, maintaining the House. But I don't know. You're more of an expert on that than I am.
Yeah, well, no, I agree with you that, again, Virginia, there are many national journalists who live there. And yes, they do tend to overinterpret results from Virginia. And so, but I mean, that doesn't diminish the importance of the state overall. And certainly, protecting kind of reproductive rights in the legislature in 2023 is going to be huge. And if they aren't protected, it's not just the narrative that's harmed. It's millions of people are harmed if you don't protect that legislature in 2023.
Okay, so tell us the story. The one that you're focused on is this primary between two Democrats, or I should say, ostensibly two Democrats.
Yeah, and so there are two candidates running in the 80th district in the House. It's a heavily Democratic seat. in the Richmond area, no Republican even filed to run in the general. But what you have is there is a kind of self-funding candidate who came out of nowhere who has more money than Destiny Bowling, who we're supporting. And if you look through his social media, he mentioned that he supported Glenn Youngkin. He mentions that he supported Donald Trump. He mentions he supports restrictions on reproductive rights. And it's he's still running as a Democrat, so it's kind of alarming that this guy who he can dip into his own pocketbook to fund a campaign and like even go on TV, which is it's alarming. And so we are working to do what we can to kind of support Destiny Bowling in this race.
I mean, what happens if a guy who supports Youngkin, supports Trump, who sounds suspiciously not like a Democrat, wins this seat in this House district? I mean, he's going to vote with Republicans.
Yeah, and I mean, if you paid attention to what happened in North Carolina, where we basically nominated the wrong person there in a seat, and she changed parties, and then now they're passing a raft of, again, they're restricting reproductive rights. They're, basically, there's a new anti-democracy push in North Carolina as well, where they're basically putting the legislature in charge of elections instead of a bipartisan board. A lot of kind of terrible things are happening there because basically in a fit of pique, this person who was nominated in a pretty sleepy primary ended up deciding to vote with the Republican Party. And so we're really trying to avoid that happening elsewhere. And again, in Virginia, you have razor thin margins in both houses. If a few hundred votes had changed in 2021, Democrats would hold the House of Delegates. That's how narrow it is. In 2023, again, there's a path to a majority for both parties in both chambers. And so every seat's going to matter. We saw in North Carolina what happens if you just lose one vote, if one vote flips. And then the alternative, look at what's happening in Minnesota right now, where holding a one-seat majority and keeping everyone on board is able to, they've been able to basically make this huge steps of progress that really could be emulated by any state. And they're doing it with the barest majorities. And so every seat matters. And this is an election where, again, you have someone who you can kind of count on to support an agenda that will help the people of Virginia, and another kind of, a candidate who has supported a lot of right-wing politicians and causes before. And so we're trying to make sure that that he is stopped.
So when you guys are supporting Destiny Bowling, like, what do you do at that point? Is it just you send her cash? Do you send her best practices? Are there other resources? What's being marshaled in her support? Going up against the guy who's self-funded and probably a guy like this.
I mean, part of it is just getting the word out too. Again, a lot of the time, these primaries, it can be hard to suss out where people stand, especially, like House of Delegates elections and primaries in Virginia don't get a ton of attention. And so if you can kind of just bring, I know. 60 Minutes turned me down, Sam. Thankfully, you were able to make some time for me.
You went to 60 Minutes after us, though, right?
Oh, yeah. Of course. So, they're not getting some attention. So just getting the word out there, helping them kind of really spread the word that, hey, there's one candidate in this race you can count on to support the values that, you probably support if you're voting in this primary. But yes, obviously, trying to, provide guidance to their campaign on kind of, how to win this primary. And of course, again, any monetary support we can provide is really greatly appreciated there. And again, at the last fundraising report, neither candidate had more than, I think, $55,000 on hand. So it's not like terribly expensive compared to like a U.S. Senate race, for example.
And this one's sure to be a Democratic seat. The winner of the primary is going to be winning winning the general. This is the general, essentially.
This is basically the general election, yes.
House District 80. Henrico, is that it? County?
Henrico County, yeah.
Henrico County. Where is that for folks who...
It's right outside Richmond.
May have friends in Virginia and don't know which district they're in. I mean, hopefully most people know which district they're in. But if you're if you're in Virginia, if you know people in Virginia, if they're whereabouts, what part of the state? Henrico County, and then where?
Yeah. It's not far from the Big Apple store in Short Pump.
Okay.
And yeah, I used to live in Virginia. I know the important landmarks. Obviously, and also if you don't live there and you want to help, check out our website, statesproject.org, and we have our Give Smart program. And if you want to send some, again, it's a race where it's not a very expensive one. So if you just want to shoot a little bit right now, I think it's probably the most effective thing you can do to stop MAGA right now.
All right. Well, we'll put a link at majority.fm in the YouTube and the podcast description. Aaron, always a pleasure. It's rare we get to see you off cycle like this.
Virginia will be through November. I'm happy to talk to you about Virginia whenever you want, especially as a former Virginia resident. Go Who's.
Okay. All right, dude. It's good talking to you.
Good talking to you. Bye.
We're going to take a break, head into the fun half. Just got an IM lefty longshoreman. Drop your East Coast bias. Start paying attention to the labor story in the West Coast ports. It's arguably the biggest economic and labor story going on right now. Aren't we looking for something for the longshoreman on that? Yeah. We're on it, even though you have been failing to give us a heads up before now.
That's on you, buddy.
Honestly, I'm not, I'm not being facetious.
It's a distributed intelligence operation.
Exactly. We do not have a team, or frankly, an individual of people who are able to go out and see find these things. One of the mechanisms we rely on is people like you sending us emails, and not just one email, because it will get lost. 3 emails, 2 to 3 emails. If it's an ongoing labor story, 2 to 3 emails. If it's really, if it's a story like you're upset at the people down the block, 1 is sufficient.
If there's a YouTube streamer we need to check.
Right.
That's 1 email.
1. Yeah. Everybody's got to, you got to work with us on this, folks. Just a reminder, it is your support, whether via email, sending us stories, or giving us reviews on iTunes, or thumbs up on YouTube, or getting a hype train going on Twitch.
Choo choo.
Or being number 7 of our viewers on Rumble.
We have been on Rumble now live for 2 days. And we have already had a 100% increase in our live viewership. Things are going great. At this rate, if we continue every 2 days to increase our membership by our viewership by 100%, we're going to be one of the biggest stations or channels on Rumble. I don't know. What do we call them? Rumbles.
Rumblers.
We're going to be one of the biggest rumblers out there. If you have friends or family who are conservative and they want to watch the show, tell them to check us out on Rumble. We're now on Rumble Live. And of course, we have set up a new conservative phone line, hotline for Rumble, 646-257-3920. We will turn on our phones in about 5-10 minutes. So if you're a Rumbler and you want to call into the show, then you can say the most vile things to us. That's fine. Or you can be polite about it and have an argument with us. That's also even more welcome. We do not screen. We do not screen our calls. So if you've got something to tell us, on Rumble,
call it a debate. Yeah, yep. It can be friendly or not friendly.
Yep. And of course, one of the ways you can support us, especially our new friends on Rumble, become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. You will get this program free of. You get the podcast, I should say, free of ads, and Not only do you get the free show, but you also get the fun half. All right, so, and justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Emma,
Hi.
What's happening on ESVN today?
We'll be doing a deep dive into the PGA merger with Liv. And then we'll also, of course, be talking about Heat Nuggets. I'm hoping the Nuggets wrap this up soon, and the Stanley Cup final, as well as the state of the running back market in the NFL, because right now, Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley kind of getting screwed over. So youtube.com/ESPN show.
Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, if there's any venture capitalists watching the show over on Rumble, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, where we have a number of stuff going on, including Capitalism in the Countryside with Keith Orahal. He is a professor at Wilmington University, or Wilmington College, I think it is. And we talk about how to understand rural versus city divide beyond sort of culture. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning for our Sunday show for patrons only.
Oh, that guy sounds good. Maybe we should put him on.
He's got a book coming out next year. So I told him, yeah.
Beautiful. All right. 646-257-3920. We will see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Can we bring back DJ Denner?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are